Hello and welcome to the Splendor of Truth. Today we are going to talk about chapter 9 and it is entitled The Architecture of Flourishing, Fairness, Love, and the Ethics of the Good Society. I am your host and the author of The Splendor of Truth. My name is Januarius Asongu. Thank you for joining me as we continue our journey through this work and through the broader philosophical vision of critical synthetic realism. Today we arrive at chapter 9, the architecture of flourishing, fairness, love, and the ethics of the good society. But before we enter chapter 9 itself, let me briefly recap where we are coming from. In chapter 8, we explored political philosophy and the defense of democracy. I argued that democracy is humanity's best system, not because it is perfect, but because it institutionalizes self correction. Healthy democracies allow criticism, accountability, open inquiry, and peaceful revision of error. And that is deeply important because human beings are fallible. No ideology is infallible. No leader is omniscient. No political movement possesses complete truth. A rational society must therefore remain open to learning, correction, and growth. But politics alone cannot answer the deeper human question. What does it actually mean to flourish? And that brings us directly into chapter 9. Chapter 9 is about the ethical foundations of civilization. It asks, what kind of society should human beings build once truth, reasoning, and the rational governance are taken seriously? Because flourishing is not merely survival. Human beings do not live by economics alone, nor by technology alone, nor by political order alone. Human flourishing requires meaning. It requires justice, compassion, fairness, human dignity, purpose, love, and ethical responsibility. This chapter therefore moves from political structures into moral civilization itself, flourishing as alignment with reality. One of the central arguments of this chapter is that flourishing occurs when human life becomes properly aligned with reality. In critical synthetic realism, truth is not merely abstract correctness. Truth has ethical consequences. Falsehood distorts human life. Truth restores orientation. And so flourishing emerges when reason aligns with reality, institutions align with justice, and individuals align their lives with truth, compassion, and responsibility. This idea has deep roots in philosophy. Aristotle called it eudaimonia, the flourishing life. But in this chapter, I attempt to reinterpret flourishing from a modern world, a world shaped by technology, globalization, inequality, ecological crisis, and epistemic fragmentation. Fairness, equality is not enough. One of the first major themes in this chapter is fairness. And here I make an important distinction. Equality and fairness are not always the same thing. Equality and fairness are not always the same thing. Think about that. Treating everyone identically does not necessarily produce justice. Human beings begin life under radically different conditions, different opportunities, different histories, different traumas, different educational access, different social structures. And truly ethical society must therefore move beyond simplistic equality towards what I describe as equity grounded in dignity. Fairness means creating conditions in which human potential can genuinely develop. It means building institutions that recognize both universal dignity and concrete realities. And this requires moral seriousness, not ideological slogans. Love as rational ethics. Now, perhaps the most important and surprising section of this chapter is my discussion of love. In modern culture, love is often reduced to emotional and personal desires. But in this chapter, I argue something much deeper. Love is an ethical orientation towards reality. Love begins when truthful recognition of the other begins with truthful recognition of the other person. To love someone is to see them truthfully, not merely as useful, not merely as an instrument, not merely as an extension of our desires, but as a person possessing intrinsic dignity. And that is why I describe love as the rational heart of ethics. Without truth, love becomes sentimentality. Without love, truth becomes cruelty. Human flourishing requires both. A good society, therefore, cannot be built purely on law and economics. It must also cultivate compassion, empathy, and moral responsibility. Sustainability and future generations. Another major theme in chapter 9 is sustainability. Modern civilizations often behave as though progress means endless consumption. But a civilization that destroys the conditions necessary for future flourishing cannot truly be rational. This includes environmental destruction, exploitative economics, institutional corruption, and short term political thinking. A flourishing society must think beyond immediate gratification. It must ask, what kind of world are we living for generations, for future generations, I mean? And that question is fundamentally ethical. A civilization obsessed with only present pleasures eventually consumes its own future. Happiness and the crisis of modern society. One of the greatest paradoxes of modernity is this. Humanity possesses unprecedented technological power, yet millions remain psychologically disoriented. We are more connected digitally, but often more fragmented emotionally, more entertained, but less fulfilled, more informed, but not necessarily wiser. This chapter argues that happiness cannot be reduced to pleasure alone. Authentic flourishing requires meaning, moral cohesion, truthful relationships, purposeful work, intellectual integrity, and participation in something greater than oneself. Without those things, comfort alone cannot sustain the human spirit. The ethics of civilization. At its deepest level, chapter 9 asks us to rethink civilization itself. What makes a civilization truly advanced? Is it military power, Is it economic output? Is it technological sophistication? Or is true advancement measured by justice, truthfulness, compassion, wisdom, and the capacity to cultivate human dignity? Critical synthetic realism argues for the second vision. A civilization becomes great not merely by accumulating power, but by aligning power with ethical truth. And this is one of the greatest challenges facing humanity today. Because technology without ethics becomes dangerous. Power without truth becomes oppressive. And freedom without responsibility becomes destructive. The good society. Toward the end of the chapter, I describe what I call the good society. The good society is not utopia. It is not perfection. Human beings will always remain imperfect, and societies will always face tension and conflict. But a good society continuously strives towards truth, justice, fairness, compassion, sustainability, and rational responsibility. It recognizes that flourishing is a collective as well is collective as well as individual. No society truly flourishes while large portions of its population remain trapped in despair, manipulation, and dehumanization. The ethical task of civilization is therefore regenerative, create conditions in which human beings can become more fully human. That is the core of this chapter. As of now, chapter 9 concludes book. Chapter 9 concludes. The book begins moving, as chapter 9 concludes, the book begins moving towards the final philosophical horizon. The next chapter, chapter 10, is entitled Knowledge and Transcendence, the epilogue of truth. There we move beyond politics and ethics into the deepest philosophical questions of all: the limits of human knowledge, mystery, transcendence, faith, mortality, and the future of reason itself. Because every philosophy that begins in inquiry eventually confronts wonder. And chapter 10 explores that final horizon. Thank you once again for joining me on this journey through the splendor of truth. If you found this episode meaningful, please take a moment to click like below. Subscribe to the channel or the podcast, and share this episode as well as other episodes with your friends, your colleagues, students, family members, and professional networks. These conversations matter deeply because in an age of confusion, polarization, misinformation, the defense of truth, reason, and human flourishing is not merely academic, it is civilizational. And thank you again for listening. I am Januarius Asongu, and remember, to think clearly is to live freely.